My manager sabotaged my internship. After I stood up for myself in a meeting, lied to HR about my performance, tried to isolate me, but I documented everything. So she got fired while I got hired. In my junior year of college, I managed to land this amazing internship. I signed an NDA, so I can't go into more detail, but it was an amazing opportunity. And since I was studying marketing, internships were crucial to getting a job. And for the first few weeks, everything was running smoothly. My boss Claire even told me that if I kept up the good work, I could definitely score a job with them in the future. So one day, when Claire asked me if I could put together a competitor's ad strategy and present it in one of the company meetings, I almost jumped with excitement. You see, this was a huge opportunity. The vice president of marketing would be there, and if I impressed him, a career opportunity would practically be guaranteed. The weeks leading up to it were exhausting. It was the biggest, most high-stakes project I had worked on, and if I spent any less than 12 hours a day working on it, then I'd be so riddled with guilt that I wouldn't even be able to sleep. I would sometimes hear Claire on the phone, bragging to her coworkers about what an amazing manager she is, about how well she trained me to take initiative. This always made me tense up, because by this point, I had been thrown into the deep end. No one was even checking up on me anymore, including Claire. She even told me to do less work, because looking at just the surface-level trends was enough. But I figured it didn't matter, because if I was brag-worthy, it meant I was doing a pretty good job. But then things escalated. In the days leading up to the meeting, Claire started treating me like I was a piece of gum stuck to the bottom of her shoe. Except, it was only when someone important was nearby. "Oh my gosh, can't you interns ever do anything by yourselves?" she'd randomly blurt out as the vice president passed by our cubicle. Or, "You lost another file?" But as soon as they passed by, she'd go back to talking normally, like nothing ever happened. I genuinely thought the stress of the meeting was making her tick or something, because when we were alone, she was kind, wholesome, the type of woman to memorize your coffee order and bring it in on a Monday morning without you asking. But because I still felt like a powerless intern, I never brought it up. It was only during the meeting that everything finally clicked. We had preparatory time beforehand, where I ran her through all my findings, but I was paying more attention to her reaction than my project, and I could tell she was impressed. When I was finished, she even patted me on the shoulder and told me I was going to be a valuable asset to the company. I could feel my face light up, and my heart beat with excitement. I went to the bathroom beforehand, did some vocal exercises, and drank a lot of water. I was ready, more than ready. But as soon as we walked in, I realized all my work had been for nothing, because as I began to present, Claire rushed me to my seat and told me she would be presenting, not me. My face flushed with embarrassment. I immediately complied and sat down. At first, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I assumed it was just procedure. But then she finished. Everyone was nodding, and some even had smiles on their faces, which is basically the corporal equivalent of cheering with joy. Then the VP spoke. "Wow, Claire, really strong work. I wasn't expecting this." "Thanks," she replied whilst beaming with pride. I thought it was important to dig deeper than surface-level trends. I was filled with rage. I had put over 200 hours into that project, and now she was taking the credit. But before I could say anything, someone else spoke. "How did you manage to gather all that intel?" I felt the corners of my lips threaten to form a smile. Meanwhile, Claire plastered on a huge plastic smile. "Oh, you know, nothing like good old hard work." The answer seemed to please them, but I wasn't allowing it, and that's when I spoke. "Claire, please tell us how you did it. I'm sure I speak for many of us when I say that I'm feeling very inspired by you." A few people nodded in agreement, and suddenly the room went silent, with all eyes on a dumbfounded lying Claire whose face was completely red. So I swooped in to save her. "Well, I assume for the competitors' conversion tactics and touchpoint, you reverse-engineered their funnel?" The whole room was listening to me, so I stood up and began to present my project in full, with no details left out. The whole time, her eyes only got wider and wider, and by the time I was finished, I knew I had taken her soul, along with everyone else's. The vice president's mouth was practically wide open with a mixture of shock and impressiveness. The room immediately broke into uproar about how I was a rare find, and how they were definitely hiring from Claire's pipeline. My heart was fluttering. It was the moment every intern dreams about, but I was so blinded by my joy that I didn't see what was right in front of me, a storm brewing inside of Claire, and she was not letting that moment go. She didn't say another word to me as we left the conference room. The walk back to our department was the most awkward 3 minutes of my life. I spent the rest of the day in a weird state of victory and panic. I'd stood up for myself, but I'd also potentially pissed off the person who determined whether my internship would lead to a job offer. As I was packing up to leave, I noticed Claire watching me from her office. The look on her face wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was calculation. The next morning, my security badge didn't work. The receptionist had to call up to let me in, which was humiliating. When I got to my desk, all my personal items had been moved to a smaller desk near the bathroom. No explanation, no email, nothing. That's when I realized I'd just gotten my first lesson in corporate politics, and the war was just beginning. I spent the entire morning in a fog of disbelief and anger. My workspace downgrade was clearly Claire's first move in whatever game she was planning to play. The desk was literally next to the bathroom door, which meant I got hit with a wave of chemical air freshener every time someone went in or out. I tried to focus on my work, but honestly, who could concentrate with constant toilet flushing as background noise? The steady stream of colleagues walking past would glance at me with mixtures of pity and curiosity, making me feel like some kind of office exhibit rather than a professional. Around lunch, Taylor from HR stopped by my sad little bathroom desk. She gave me this awkward smile and asked if I could pop by her office for a quick chat. My stomach immediately knotted up. Everyone knows a surprise HR meeting is never good news. I gathered my notepad and pen, trying to appear composed while internally panicking about what might be coming next. Taylor's office was one of those glass-walled situations situations where everyone can see you're in trouble but can't hear what's being said. Great for workplace humiliation. She motioned for me to sit down and gave me that practiced HR smile that never reaches the eyes. The overhead fluorescent light seemed particularly harsh that day, highlighting the tension in the room. "So, we've received some concerning feedback about your performance," she started, glancing down at a folder on her desk. "Claire has documented several incidents of unprofessional conduct." I nearly choked. "What incidents?" "I've been working nonstop on that presentation that..." Taylor held up her hand. "According to this, you've been consistently late, missed deadlines, and were insubordinate during yesterday's quarterly meeting." My jaw literally dropped. None of that was true. I'd been arriving early every day, staying late, and what happened in that meeting was, well, it definitely wasn't insubordination. I was just preventing my work from being stolen. The accusations were so blatantly false that I struggled to formulate a coherent response, my thoughts racing through every interaction I'd had with Claire over the past weeks. "That's completely false," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have email timestamps proving when I submitted everything, and I've been badging in before 8 a.m. every day." Taylor gave me that patronizing head tilt. "Claire is a valued senior manager with an excellent track record. She's nurtured many successful interns through our program." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. "This is a performance improvement plan. You'll need to meet these benchmarks over the next 2 weeks." I looked down at the document. The improvement areas were vague enough to be impossible to measure. Things like demonstrate better team attitude and show appropriate respect for hierarchy. It was genius, really. Claire had created a paper trail that made me look bad while giving herself complete control over whether I improved or not. My hands trembled slightly as I reviewed the document, the implications of what was happening becoming increasingly clear. I left the HR office feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. A couple of other interns looked up as I walked past, then quickly avoided eye contact. Word had clearly gotten around. The hallway seemed longer than usual as I made my way back to my desk, each step feeling heavier than the last. Back at my bathroom desk, I found my computer login wasn't working. The IT ticket system was down, so I had to awkwardly ask the guy in the cubicle next to me if I could use his computer to submit a help request. He hesitated before letting me, as if my career failure might be contagious. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment as I typed out the support ticket, hyper-aware of his peripheral glances at my screen. I spent the rest of the day organizing paper files since I couldn't access anything digital. It was mindless busy work, but it gave me time to think. Claire was systematically isolating me and building a case for my termination. If I just kept my head down, I'd be out within 2 weeks. If I fought back, well, who would believe an intern over a manager? The file cabinets were dusty and disorganized, clearly untouched for months before being assigned to me as a punishment disguised as a task. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering if I'd made a horrible mistake by speaking up. Maybe I should have just let her take credit. Maybe that's just how corporate America works. I texted my roommate who was doing an internship at a different company, asking if her boss ever pulled this kind of stuff. She called me immediately, and I ended up word vomiting the whole story. The bedroom ceiling became my blank canvas as I stared upward in the darkness, mapping out possible scenarios and outcomes until the early hours of the morning. "You need to document everything," she said after listening. "Save emails, take notes after conversations, forward important stuff to your personal email." "Isn't that like company theft or something?" I asked. "It's protecting yourself," she countered. "You signed an NDA about company information, not about your personal experiences with workplace bullying." The next morning, I created a new folder in my personal email called Claire Evidence. I started by writing down everything I could remember from the past few weeks, with dates and times where possible. Then I dug through my sent items folder for all the update emails I'd sent Claire about the presentation project, showing my progress and her minimal responses. When I got to work, my computer access had been restored, but I discovered most of my project files had been moved or deleted. Fortunately, I'd backed everything up on that flash drive I'd brought to the meeting. Claire was in back-to-back meetings all day, which gave me breathing room to think and plan. Around 3 p.m., I got an email from Richard, one of the senior managers who'd been in the quarterly meeting. He wanted to touch base about some of the competitor analysis I'd presented. I nearly fell out of my chair. This was exactly the kind of networking opportunity I'd been hoping for from that presentation. We met in the small break room, away from Claire's office. Richard was one of those older guys with perpetually rumpled shirts who looked like he hadn't updated his wardrobe since 1997, but everyone knew he was basically a marketing genius. "That was impressive work for an intern," he said, stirring an ungodly amount of sugar into his coffee. "Where did you learn to build out funnel analysis like that?" I explained about a special project I'd done in my digital marketing class, plus some YouTube tutorials I'd followed to learn the analytics software. He nodded along, asking surprisingly specific questions about my methodology. As our impromptu meeting wrapped up, he lowered his voice. Office politics can be tricky to navigate, especially when you're new. He didn't say anything explicitly about Claire, but his expression made it clear he wasn't clueless about what had happened. "I'm learning that," I said carefully. "Keep doing good work," he replied. "People notice, even when it seems like they don't." I walked back to my desk feeling marginally better. At least someone had recognized my effort. Unfortunately, Claire was back from her meetings and had noticed my absence. She was leaning against my desk, scrolling through her phone with an air of calculated casualness that immediately put me on edge. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice sweet, but her eyes cold. "I've been looking for those competitor social media screenshots." I explained about meeting with Richard, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the little victory dance happening in my head. Claire's eye twitched slightly. "In the future, please run all cross-departmental meetings by me first. It's important that we present a unified message. Translation: don't talk to other managers without my permission." "Of course," I said. "I'll send those screenshots right over." The next few days settled into an uncomfortable pattern. Claire would would assign me tedious entry-level tasks that had nothing to do with my skills or the project I'd been working on. She'd forget to invite me to relevant meetings, then criticize me for not being informed about changes. Every morning, I'd find that small things on my desk had been moved around, pens rearranged, sticky notes in different places, just enough to make me feel watched but not enough to complain about. I kept documenting everything and forwarding key emails to my personal account. I also started quietly reaching out to other interns to see if Claire had done this before. Most were too scared to say much, but one guy who'd finished his internship the previous semester sent me a lengthy message about how Claire had taken credit for his work on a different project. Nobody did anything because she's tight with the director of marketing, his message concluded. Most interns only stay a semester, so it's easier to just deal with it than fight the system. This was getting ridiculous. I hadn't gone through 4 semesters of marketing theory and crashed my sleep schedule for weeks just to be pushed out by some credit-stealing corporate climber, but I needed to be smart about this. Direct confrontation clearly wasn't working. I needed a strategic approach that wouldn't make me look like the problematic one. My opportunity came faster than expected. On Thursday afternoon, Claire dumped a massive research project on my desk, due the following Monday. It was easily 30+ hours of work to complete properly. She knew damn well it was impossible to finish in one business day, which meant I'd either have to work all weekend or fail to meet the deadline, giving her another black mark to add to my HR file. I'll need the competitive analysis for all 7 market segments with full consumer demographic breakdowns, she said with a smirk. Monday morning, my desk, 8 a.m. sharp. I smiled and nodded. No problem. As soon as she walked away, I started building my case. I created a detailed project plan showing the minimum hours needed for each component. I documented exactly when the assignment was given to me. Then I sent Claire an email confirming the request and timeline, making sure to copy my personal email. Instead of killing myself to finish the impossible task, I decided to work smart. I pulled out my previous competitor analysis, the one Claire had stolen, and extracted the relevant parts that could be repurposed. I spent Thursday night creating a framework for the new analysis, using the most efficient research methods I'd learned during the previous project. On Friday morning, I arrived extra early and went straight to Richard's office. He wasn't in yet, but his assistant Elizabeth was. Do you think Richard would have 5 minutes to give me some advice on a project approach? I asked her. I'm trying to improve my efficiency on competitive analyses. Elizabeth checked his calendar and managed to squeeze me in before his 9 a.m. meeting. I spent those precious 5 minutes explaining the project parameters and my proposed approach, asking if he saw any shortcuts or efficiency improvements. Richard glanced at the project scope, then back at me with raised eyebrows. This was assigned yesterday? For Monday? When I nodded, he shook his head slightly. Your approach looks solid. Focus on the top 3 market segments first. That's where 80% of the value will come from anyway. As I was leaving, he added, document your working hours on this. It's important for resource planning. I took that advice to heart. I created a detailed timesheet tracking every minute I spent on the project. I worked through lunch and stayed late on Friday. I came in on Saturday for 6 hours and Sunday for another 4. By Sunday night, I had a solid professional analysis of the top 3 market segments completed, with partial information on the others. On Monday morning, I arrived at 7:30 a.m. to print and organize everything. I placed the completed portions on Claire's desk, along with my detailed timesheet showing 22 total hours worked, including weekend time. I also attached a professional note explaining my prioritization strategy and the status of the remaining segments. Claire arrived at 8:15, looking surprised to see me already working. She picked up my report without a word and took it into her office. 20 minutes later, she summoned me. This is incomplete, she said flatly, tapping the report. I specifically asked for all 7 segments. I prioritized based on market impact, I explained. The top 3 segments represent 83% of the total market. I've included my methodology and timesheet showing the hours invested, including weekend work. Claire's eyes narrowed when she saw the timesheet. This shouldn't have taken 22 hours. The previous interns completed similar projects much more efficiently. I'd be happy to review their work to learn from their methods, I replied innocently. Could you share their previous analyses with me? She flushed slightly. We both knew those analyses didn't exist, at least not ones actually created by other interns. That won't be necessary, she said. I'm adding this missed deadline to your performance improvement plan. I need the remaining segments by tomorrow morning. I nodded and left her office, making sure to send myself another documentation email. That afternoon, I received an unexpected message from Taylor in HR asking me to stop by when I had a moment. My stomach dropped again. Was this it? Was I getting fired already? Taylor looked different this time, less rehearsed, more uncomfortable. I wanted to follow up on your PIP, she said. Have you been keeping track of your progress? Yes, I said, pulling out my folder of documentation. I've been documenting everything, including hours worked, communication received, and projects completed. I handed her my timesheet for the weekend project. I was just assigned this impossible deadline that required weekend work with no advance notice. I don't mind putting in extra hours, but I want to make sure it's noted that I'm exceeding standard expectations. Taylor looked genuinely surprised as she reviewed my documentation. This is very thorough, she said slowly. Mind if I keep a copy for your file? I happily agreed, feeling like maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning. After our meeting, I threw myself back into finishing the remaining market segments. I stayed until 9 p.m. that night to complete everything, making sure to update my timesheet accordingly. The next morning, I placed the completed analysis on Claire's desk with a simple note. All 7 segments completed as requested. Total hours, 34 inches. I also emailed her the files, copying Taylor from HR and Richard from my previous conversation. Claire stormed over to my desk within minutes. Why did you copy other people on on a routine project email, she hissed, keeping her voice low but intense. I thought it was important to keep everyone in the loop, I said calmly. Since there were questions about my ability to meet deadlines, I wanted to ensure proper documentation. Her face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on a tight smile. Let's talk in the conference room, she said. The small conference room felt suffocating as Claire closed the door behind us. She remained standing while I sat, a classic power move. Look, she began. I don't think you understand how things work here. Interns are supposed to learn and support, not try to showboat in front of executives. I'm just trying to do good work, I replied. The quarterly presentation was my project. I spent hundreds of hours on it. It was your project? She laughed. Nothing you do here is your project. Everything belongs to the company, and as your manager, I determine how work is presented and who gets credit. I took a deep breath. Is that why you've been setting me up to fail since I spoke up in that meeting? Moving my desk, giving me impossible deadlines, creating a false performance record? Claire's fake smile disappeared. You need to decide if you want a future in marketing, because right now, you're burning bridges that you can't afford to lose. Is that a threat? I asked quietly. It's reality, she replied. This is a small industry. People talk. She left the conference room first, and I sat there trying to process what had just happened. She had basically admitted to sabotaging me because I'd prevented her from stealing my work, and she was threatening my future career if I didn't fall in line. When I finally returned to my desk, I had an email from Richard asking me to come to his office that afternoon to discuss my competitor analysis. Claire was copied on the email but hadn't responded. The hours until that meeting were excruciating. Claire avoided me completely, which was actually a welcome change. At 3 p.m., I headed to Richard's office, palms sweating. To my surprise, Elizabeth showed me in right away, and the VP of marketing was sitting there too. My heart nearly stopped. Richard gestured for me to sit down. We wanted to discuss your recent work, he said, particularly your approach to competitive analysis. I nodded, too nervous to speak. It's quite impressive, the VP said, tapping my report that sat on Richard's desk, especially the cross-platform engagement metrics. Those are the kinds of insights we need more of. Wait, what? They liked it? In fact, Richard continued, we're putting together a special project team for a major client pitch next month. We'd like you to join it, reporting directly to me for the duration. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What about my current responsibilities? I asked, thinking of Claire. The VP waved his hand dismissively. We'll sort that out with Claire. This takes priority. As I left Richard's office, feeling like I was floating on air, I spotted Claire watching from down the hallway. The look on her face wasn't just anger anymore, it was fear, because we both knew exactly what was happening. I wasn't just surviving her attempts to push me out, I was actually thriving despite them. The special project meant I'd be working with a different team in a different part of the office. I gathered my meager belongings from my bathroom desk the next morning, noticing that Claire was conspicuously absent. As I was setting up at my new temporary workspace, an actual cubicle with privacy walls, a notification popped up on my phone. It was an email from Taylor in HR, requesting another meeting that afternoon. This time, I wasn't worried. I had documentation, I had allies, and most importantly, I had valuable work to show for myself. Whatever storm Claire was brewing, I was finally ready to face it head on. I made my way to Taylor's office that afternoon, feeling weirdly calm. The hallways seemed different somehow, like I was walking them as someone with actual purpose instead of just an intern trying not to get in anyone's way. A couple people from the new project team nodded at me as I passed. One guy even gave me a little thumbs up. Taylor was typing away when I knocked on her doorframe. She looked up and motioned for me to come in, and I noticed she wasn't wearing that fake HR smile anymore. Thanks for coming by, she said, closing her laptop. Please have a seat. I sat down, clutching my folder of documentation. Is this about my transfer to Richard's team? Taylor leaned forward. Partially. I wanted to discuss your situation with Claire. My stomach tightened. Here we go. We've received some concerning information, she continued. After reviewing your documentation and speaking with several people, I need to ask, has Claire been deliberately creating obstacles for you since the quarterly presentation? I nearly fell out of my chair. I expected to walk in and defend myself, not have HR actually acknowledge what was happening. For a second, I couldn't even speak. Yes, I finally said. She has. I've documented everything. I placed my folder on her desk and opened it to the timeline I'd created. It started immediately after the meeting when she moved my desk next to the bathroom. Then she began excluding me from team communications, assigning impossible deadlines, and creating false performance issues. Taylor nodded slowly as she flipped through my documentation. This is very thorough. I've never dealt with anything like this before, I admitted. I wasn't sure what else to do. You did exactly the right thing, she said. We've also received corroborating information from other sources. My mind raced. Other sources? Had someone else spoken up about Claire? What happens now? I asked. For now, your transfer to Richard's team stands. The company takes these matters very seriously. She closed my folder and handed it back to me. Keep this safe. If you experience any further issues, please come to me immediately. I left Taylor's office feeling like I'd entered some alternate reality where interns actually had rights. Did this mean Claire was actually facing consequences? Walking back to my new desk, I spotted Jessica, one of the other former interns who'd worked under Claire. She gave me a small smile and a nod as I passed, and suddenly I understood. I wasn't the first person Claire had done this to. I was just the first one who'd fought back with evidence. The next few days were wild. I dove into Richard's project and absolutely loved it. We were developing a comprehensive digital strategy for a major retail client, and my input was actually valued. Richard introduced me as the competitor analysis expert in our first team meeting, and I nearly died from pride right there in my chair. Claire was suspiciously absent from the office. Nobody said anything officially, but the rumor mill was churning. I overheard two managers in the break room whispering about administrative leave and investigation. I tried not to look too interested while I waited forever for the microwave to heat up my sad desk lunch. On Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from my roommate. "How's it going with the boss from hell?" I started typing back a whole update when I realized Claire was walking down the hallway toward the executive offices. Our eyes met briefly, and let me tell you, if looks could kill, I'd have dropped dead right there between the water cooler and the copy machine. She looked away first, though, which felt like a tiny victory. Later that day, my new team was working late, ordering Chinese food and finalizing our strategy presentation. We were all sitting around a conference table covered in open takeout containers and spreadsheet printouts when my phone buzzed again. It was an email from Taylor asking me to come to her office first thing tomorrow morning. My stomach immediately twisted into knots. "You okay?" asked Robert, one of the senior analysts. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Just HR stuff," I said, trying to sound casual. "Probably paperwork for the team transfer." I barely slept that night, my mind creating worst-case scenarios. What if Claire had somehow turned this all around on me? What if the investigation found I was the problem? I'd been at the company less than 3 months. They could easily terminate my internship, and I'd have nothing to show for all this stress except a hole in my resume. The next morning, I got to the office early, my stomach in knots. I made my way to HR, rehearsing what I'd say if they tried to blame me for everything. Taylor was already at her desk, and she wasn't alone. The VP of marketing was there too. Great. When important people get involved, it's never good news for interns. "Come in," Taylor said when she saw me hovering in the doorway. "Close the door behind you." I sat down, trying not to look as terrified as I felt. The VP spoke first. "We wanted to discuss your internship situation." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "After a thorough investigation," he continued, "we've determined that there were significant issues with how your contributions were being managed and recognized. The company takes intellectual ownership and mentorship very seriously." I just stared at him, waiting for the but that would lead to bad news. "Claire is no longer with the company," Taylor said. My jaw literally dropped. "She's gone?" The VP nodded. "We've also reviewed the structure of our internship program. Moving forward, interns will report to department leads rather than individual managers, with regular check-ins to ensure proper mentorship." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only was Claire gone, but they'd actually changed company policy because of what happened. "There's one more thing," the VP added. "Richard speaks very highly of your work. We'd like to offer you a part-time position for the remainder of your college program, with potential for full-time employment after graduation." I nearly fell out of my chair. "Are you serious?" Taylor slid a folder across the desk. "This contains the offer details. Take some time to review it and let us know your decision by next week." I walked out of that meeting in a daze, clutching the folder like it might disappear if I loosened my grip. I ducked into an empty conference room and called my mom, trying to whisper scream the news without the entire office hearing me. "They fired her? And offered you a job?" My mom was practically shouting on her end. "That's amazing. We need to celebrate." I promised to call her back later and headed to my desk, still processing everything. Richard spotted me in the hallway and gave me a thumbs up. He must have known about the offer already. "Told you people notice good work?" he said with a wink as he passed. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to focus on my actual work, but kept getting distracted by the whole situation. A couple people from my original department stopped by to ask if the rumors were true. Apparently word had spread that Claire was gone, and I'd somehow survived her attempts to push me out. After work, my roommate insisted on taking me out for celebratory drinks. We ended up at this dive bar near campus where half our marketing class was already hanging out. When I walked in, Jessica from the office was there too. "Hey, office celebrity," she called out, raising her beer. I felt my face turn bright red as I made my way over to her table. "Is that what they're calling me now?" Jessica laughed. "You're basically a legend. Nobody stands up to Claire and wins." "I wasn't trying to start office drama," I said. "I just wanted credit for my work." "That's why it matters," she replied, suddenly serious. "Claire did the same thing to me last year. Took my entire campaign concept and presented it as her own. I didn't have the guts to say anything." "You mean I wasn't the first?" I asked, though I'd already suspected as much. "Not even close," Jessica said. "She's been pulling this for years, using interns to do her work, taking credit, then pushing them out if they complained. But nobody had the evidence like you did." We ended up talking for hours. Jessica introduced me to 2 other former interns who'd had similar experiences with Claire. One guy had actually changed his major after his internship, thinking he wasn't cut out for marketing. Finding out I wasn't alone made me feel validated, but also sad that Claire had gotten away with it for so long. The following Monday, I signed my employment contract. The terms were better than I'd expected. Flexible hours to work around my class schedule, proper benefits, and actual career development opportunities. I kept pinching myself, sure that at any moment someone would realize they'd made a huge mistake. My first official day as an actual employee, I found a small plant on my desk with a note from Richard. "Congratulations on putting down roots here." It was super cheesy but kind of perfect. The office felt different now. People who'd never spoken to me before stopped by to introduce themselves. I got invited to department lunches and happy hours. Even the VP nodded at me in the hallway once, which apparently was a big deal according to the other junior staff. About a month later, I was working late on a project when Elizabeth, Richard's assistant, stopped by my desk. "You've got an email notification," she said. "Thought you might want to see it right away." I opened my inbox to find a message from a major competitor's HR department. The subject line, "Reference check for Claire Wilson." I stared at it for a solid minute, not sure what to do. On one hand, I didn't want to be vindictive. On the other hand, I couldn't in good conscience let her do this to someone else. I ended up forwarding it to Taylor with a simple note. "Not sure how to respond respond to this. Taylor replied almost immediately. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. We'll handle it appropriately. That night, I updated my resume to include my new position. Where it used to say marketing intern, it now read junior marketing strategist. I stared at those words for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. The whole situation with Claire taught me more about office politics than any class ever could. It wasn't just about doing good work, it was about protecting yourself, documenting everything, and finding allies who recognized your value. Yeah, standing up for myself was terrifying, but the alternative would have been letting someone else take credit for my hard work for the rest of my career. It's been 6 months now, and things have settled into a new normal. I'm still balancing work and classes, but it feels sustainable. Richard's been an amazing mentor, giving me increasingly complex projects and actual constructive feedback. Next month, I'm even leading my first client presentation, with full credit for my work, of course. Sometimes I wonder where Claire ended up. Did she find another company to continue her intern exploitation scheme? Or did she actually learn something from finally facing consequences? I'll probably never know. But I do know that I learned something valuable, that sometimes you have to risk looking like the troublemaker to stand up for what's right. Last week, I met the new batch of interns on their first day. As I was showing them around, one of them asked how I went from intern to employee so quickly. I just smiled and said, make sure you keep good records of all your work. The confused looks on their faces made me laugh. They'll understand soon enough.